Let's speak to Ulrich Bruckner, Professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. Welcome to the program, Ulrich. You know, when this happened, so many people were thinking that something was not quite right. We heard the accusations from some of the survivors. There were investigations, but the Greeks continued to deny it. Now the charges have been laid. Why would the Greek Coast Guard, if it's proven that they did what they're accused of doing, why would they do something like that? What would be the motivation?
Well, when we look at the bigger picture, we see a swing from the one extreme that, for example, Italy called a refugee policy Mare Nostrum, that it's their sea and everything that happens in their sea is their responsibility. And they saved every single person they could possibly get, from one extreme, like the most humanitarian attitude, to what we currently see at the American-Mexican border, that if you provide the most horrible broadcasting, what happens to refugees, then you get the numbers down. And in this extreme, from a welcoming culture from 10 years ago to providing horror as horror stops migration, we respond to a different discourse that we find in the different member states of the European Union. And therefore, it comes as a ray of light in a development that is becoming much more darker, that a court in Greece is investigating under what conditions this death of refugees happened and who's responsible.
Should the court also look into motivation, Ulrich? Does the court need to find a determination that these Greek Coast Guard officers may have acted on their own, or does it need to investigate whether they were given instructions? Because if they were given instructions, those would presumably come from a political source, because migration is a political issue as well as an economic one, of course, and a social one.
Yes, that's exactly the role that the court has to play right now. And of course, it's adding too much weight to a single judge to decide on something that is not just a Greek problem, but it's a European one, because people who risk their life to flee from unbearable conditions and to hope that they could lead a life in Europe are not necessarily trying to start a life in Greece. 10 years ago, Germany was among the most popular countries, and therefore we can only find a collective solution. So what is now happening in a bigger picture is that the horror is no longer provided by bordering countries that do the dirty job in the European Union, but bordering countries on the other side of the Mediterranean, in which we don't have the same coverage and the same pictures, but the message that should be sent from those who think that the biggest problem in Europe is immigration is that people should not even try to cross the Mediterranean, because what happens to them is unbearable.
Ulrich, in your analysis, have you found that possibly Frontex, which is the EU's border agency, needs to be investigated for its attitude towards migrants? Because then the court will presumably, we're talking about the motivation of the Greek Coast Guard, but maybe the court should also look at how the EU's general border agency also operates and how it operates with its constituent parts and member states.
Well, Europe praises itself that it's a value-based organization. And if we think we are, then we should live up to expectations and look into every single part of the not so promising migration policy that is a collaboration of member states' responsibilities and, as you mentioned, the border guards that are financed by the European Union under Frontex. So whoever is violating the core principles and the norms of the European Union should be held responsible. But this is just people who execute what fits into a broader picture, and that is not very promising right now.
Ulrich Bruckner, as always, thank you so much.